Welcome to the Narrate podcast, where we aim to tell God's story with our lives. We'll be continuing to post the Sunday message each week, but we want to dive a little deeper and offer some content to supplement your life with God, and that's where our Beyond Sunday series comes in. Join Adam and Narrate staff as they provide thoughtful discussions, ideas, and interviews that go beyond the message you'll hear on Sunday.
One of the things I find myself saying to people quite often is, there's not things that I started doing because I became Anglican. I mean, there's certainly some, but mostly it's about I became Anglican because of things that I was already doing. And this is especially true as it relates to the church calendar and the lectionary. See, in 2020, for the first time in Narrate's history, we started a series with no clear end date. Having personally found a lot of meaning by just reading through Matthew one story at a time in my own quiet times, I subsequently pulled Sunday mornings into the experience. In the end, the quote-unquote Matthew series, as we called it, lasted about 18 months. And bear in mind that prior to the Matthew series, our series were generally 3 to 4 weeks long and were generally topically driven. I found the experience very healing. I needed it, especially during those tumultuous days of COVID. I couldn't take any more voices or authors. I just had to return to the text. What it allowed me to do is, rather than curate for myself what to read, I just got to show up every week to a new story, a new portion of Matthew, and was invited, tasked with seeing what God had for me in the story. I've never burdened myself with having to exhaust every detail or find every meaning, but just try to look at the history and ask good questions and see what's God saying to me on this pass through. Later, when I was teaching my way through Matthew, I had a very similar experience of just teaching what was there rather than picking topics. Somewhere along the line, my friend and mentor Chris McDaniel helped me see the parallel between what I was doing with the Matthew series and what the lectionary attempts to do year in and year out. For the sake of brief definition, the lectionary is a weekly selection of text that follows a 3-year cycle. It's different readings every Sunday for 3 years. That's different than the daily office, which is different daily readings over the course of a few years. In both the lectionary and the daily office, you don't get the entire Bible, and that oftentimes gets criticized, but you get large portions of the Bible every Sunday. And every Sunday, there's an Old Testament reading, there's a Psalm reading, which obviously is also in the Old Testament, there's a Gospel reading, and then there's a New Testament reading, which the Gospels are obviously a part of. But every Sunday, there's 4 readings. Rarely have I studied all 4. Rarely have we taught all 4. But they have a theme to them. There's a connection made by them. Today, we don't follow the lectionary 52 weeks a year. There's still times when we do topic-based series. But I do love the lectionary as a great default, both personally as I study in my quiet times and also for Sunday mornings. We've also taken to following the lectionary for Advent, Lent, and the 50 days of Easter. Which brings me to the church calendar. I'm kind of overlapping these two things. It sounds odd, but I'm actually starting to think it's massively relevant in our cultural moment. An Anglican priest friend of mine named Michael recently said to me, actually I'd asked him, what gives you your Anglican identity? What's at the top of that? And for him, the church calendar was one of the first things. He went on to say that we all follow a calendar, whether it's a hunting calendar or a kid's sports calendar or a school calendar or a financial calendar. All of us are living the rhythms of our life according to a calendar. He simply was saying, what I love about the church calendar is it invites me to make the rhythms of my life follow this very intentional cycle of thought and prayer provided by the church. To be clear, the church calendar is way more involved, or can be, than I intend to represent here. But in its simplest form, it's about allowing the rhythms of Advent and their focus on Jesus' second coming, and Lent and its focus on our need for God's rescue and healing, and then Eastertide, or the 50 days of Easter, and our call to live in community as Jesus' new creation people in the world, animated by God's Spirit, which we celebrate on Pentecost. Then there's ordinary time, where we just focus on what it means to be the church and telling God's story to one another and our world. See, the combination of the lectionary and the church calendar It invites us to cyclically be formed by God's story. I've personally come to look forward to the two great fasts of Advent and Lent. They have a way of making sure my addictions are kept at bay, as well as reminding me that before I'm anything, I'm a follower of Jesus. I look forward to this extended season of fasting, and I've talked about this elsewhere, I think fasting is this crucial practice of the early church that can be really, really helpful. In fact, it was one of the first things that I incorporated from the ancient church. In fact, I think what I learned about fasting is what pulled me into the ancient church. Eastern Orthodoxy in particular has a really robust tradition of fasting. Anyway, that's a big tangent on fasting. See, I've also come to love when my quiet times follow the lectionary because I love the chance to submit to what God has for me, rather than constantly pursuing my own interests, though I still value that too. I found myself also wondering how much pastoral burnout might be avoided if there was more permission to live into the readings provided by the lectionary. And I can't help but wonder if more people would find daily Bible reading more accessible if they were just simply invited to use the daily version of the lectionary, most commonly referred to as the daily office. Ultimately, I don't have a lot to say about this one, but I'm certainly aware that part of my answer to the question, why have I opted for an Anglican identity, is the church calendar and the lectionary. I think it falls into the category of something that's ancient and yet speaks really prophetic to our cultural moment. I don't see it as a have to. I think I would resist it if I did. But I do see it as this brilliant toolbox that for me is really proving helpful in my own desire to be formed and shaped by Christ. And it's helping me as I lead and try to live out my vocation as leading a local church. Would love to talk more about this with you. Holler if you have any questions or want to have more conversation. Thanks.
If you'd like to learn more about Narrate Church, find us online at narratechurch.org.
You can also look us up on Facebook or Instagram. Thanks for listening.